Welcome back to Server-Side Web Development. This is Lecture 9. In this lecture, we'll be discussing RESTful controllers, RESTful routes, and forms in Laravel. Let's get started. RESTful controllers. So we've been spending time with controllers already, and we know that controllers serve as the logic between the view and the model. Well, as you build Laravel sites, you will come to a specific pattern that occurs. It's actually very similar to the same pattern that we experience with databases, which we've called CRUD, which stands for create, read, update, delete. Well, Laravel applications have a very similar pattern as well. And there are 7 RESTful controllers that apply to that. Now, when we refer to 7 RESTful controllers, we're actually talking about the methods inside of a controller. So let's talk about the 7. You're already familiar with 2 of them. We've used them in examples before. The first one is index. And the index method inside of a controller is typically used to display all of the items. So say if we were building a movie website and we wanted to display all the movies, we would set up an index method that would retrieve all the movies from a database and then call the view to display them all. Right? So that's what index does. The other one we've seen before is show. And the show method is used to display one item. So we have a specific item that we want to view. Again, our movie examples, we display our movies. We click on one of the movies to get more details. We'll use the show method to retrieve that single movie and therefore display its details. So again, we've already covered these 2. Now we're going to get into some of the newer ones. The next one we'll talk about is the create method. Now the create method only displays the form that is used to create new items. So again, it does not actually communicate with the database at all. It merely calls the view that displays the form that the user would use to create a new movie. So again, it's just for displaying the form. I find that I don't always use the create one because the form is already on, say, the display all page. So you wouldn't need the create method. So this one is not as required as some of the others. Tied to the create is the store method. Now this is the method that actually creates the new item in the database. So we would have the create method display the form, and that form would submit to a route that would point to the store method. And the store method would again store the new movie or the new item in the database. So we have items for creating and storing, but now we need an item to edit an existing item in our database or an existing movie in our movie site example. And we would use the edit method to display the form again. Just like with create displays a create form, edit would display the edit form of an item. Now this one will need to communicate with the database because you're going to need to retrieve the item's data from the database so you can display it inside of the form. So that form is pre-filled with that data. So we have the edit form. Again, this one is another one kind of like create. It doesn't always get used. We're going to be doing an example a little bit later in the lecture today where we won't be using create or edit methods because they'll be inline displayed in our index page. All right, so we have index, show, create, store, and edit. Along with edit, we have the update method. And as the name suggests, this will update the item from the edit form. So when the form is filled out, it is submitted to a route that will point to the update method. The final one of our 7s, because we have 6 right here, the last method is the destroy method. And this destroy method will delete the item from the database. So that's its whole purpose, is just to delete the item. All right, so we have these 7 controller methods. Now you do not have to use this. There's no requirement that you have to use this in a Laravel project, but this is pretty standard Laravel convention to use these 7 methods. Now, methods are no good without roots because our roots is what points to our controller methods. So now we're going to move on to RESTful roots and see how we tie the roots to these methods. All right, so RESTful roots. Just like there are 7 RESTful controller methods, we have specific roots we can use that tie to the data or ties to the controllers that we're looking at. Now there's fewer of these because these are tied to the HTTP verbs that we can use. And these verbs are used for specific situations. We're already familiar with one, and that's the get. The get HTTP verb. And the get is for displaying data. So anytime you're going to be displaying data, say a list of movies or movies displaying a specific movie details, or you're displaying the create form or the edit form, all of those are going to be using the get HTTP protocol. Now, if you're going to be submitting a form, so for example, you filled out the form for create or editing an item, well, then you're going to be using the post. Okay, and more specifically, I made a little faux pas. I don't mean editing. It's purely for creating data. So we use the post one for creating data. This post is the same post method that we would use to submit forms in HTML. So we would set inside of our form method post, and then in our root, we would share that post method, or we'd use that post HTTP verb. And again, this is used for creating data. Now, traditionally, so far in previous examples or in before we moved into Laravel, we had to just sit with just post for everything because there's no other way of having a form. Forms can only submit using get or post. Well, there are other verbs associated with it, and the other one, or another one, is the put method, the put HTTP verb, and this is used for updating data. So we use post to create data, and we use put to update data. And as I was trying to explain earlier, in a form, we either use get or post. We can only use those two. Well, Laravel has a way of spoofing so that we can use both put and the last one, which we're going to talk about, which is delete, inside of a form. And we're going to demonstrate that here shortly. But these are our 4 we're looking at. So we have get for displaying data, we have post for creating data, we use put to update data, and of course the last one, which I just hadn't talked about yet, which is delete, is used to delete data. So we're going to be using these 4 root verbs. Now these are the root methods that we use to create our roots, which will point to the controller methods to display the data. These are the 4 that we're going to be using for creating pretty much any Laravel project as well. All right, so we have our controllers, we have our roots now. To tie them together, we're going to need to be able to use forms, because the forms are the way we're going to be able to create new data and to update data. We're also going to be using forms to delete data as well, because that's a way we can safely delete data that doesn't make it a security risk. So let's talk about forms in Laravel. Now, we're not going to be going into a whole lot of detail on how the forms work. I'm going to talk about specific features that Laravel has introduced in their forms, and then inside our example, I'll show you how those work. All right, so like I was mentioning, Laravel has incorporated many features to make working with forms much easier and much more secure. The first thing they've introduced is a cross-site request forgery. So what this is, it's a little tag that we introduce inside of our Blade template, and it will add a hidden input that will basically serve as a test to see that nobody is trying to spoof our form on their sites. This protects our site from being basically hijacked by users, and usually for malicious intent. So this cross-site request forgery, which we'll show you, it's actually really simple to use. They've made it very simple to use. Basically protects our form, and without it, our form will not work. So we have to have it inside of forms inside of Laravel. The next thing that they've introduced is method spoofing, and I was talking about this a little bit earlier. This will allow us to basically create or allow us to pass data using put or delete methods, which is not technically possible, or it's not natively possible with an HTML form. So we'll talk about method spoofing. Again, very easy to use. It's one line of code, and we can set up our forms to submit using put and delete. The last feature, which we probably won't be spending a whole lot of time on in this class, but I do want to bring it up because it is very important, is form validation. Now, Laravel does have a system for creating form validation on the server end, which is very important when you're getting any data from a user, is that you want to make sure that it's not malicious and that it is accurate. So you can set up some validation on the server end. Along with that, you should also be setting up validation on the client side as well. You don't want to rely on client side validation only. Server side validation is always important, but client side makes it a little friendlier, user friendly for the person filling out the form. All right, so those are the type of features that are introduced in form. Now let's see it put all together in a hands-on example. So what we're going to be building on in this hands-on example is the grocery list app project that has been moved away from an exercise. If you read the announcement from this course, that used to be an exercise, but now we're going to build it inside of this lecture. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, the first step for creating our grocery list application is to open up phpMyAdmin and to create the database that will be the backend for our grocery list. So again, you can go to phpMyAdmin on a Mac going phpMyAdmin.test. If you're on a Windows using Laravel, it would be localhost/phpMyAdmin. So let's go ahead and log in. Again, the username and password are root and root. And now we're going to create a new database. So let's go ahead and go to new. And we'll give it a database name. So we're going to give it grocery. And we'll leave the encoding at its default, and we'll just click create. All right, now that we have the database created, we won't actually be creating any of the tables here. We're going to be using Laravel's migration system to do all of the database table creation for us. But we do need that database created first. So now that we have the database created, we can go on and create our Laravel project. All right, so the next step to creating our grocery list application is to open up our terminal and create our Laravel project using the Laravel command line application. So if you're on a Mac, you can open up the terminal application. If you're on Windows using Laravel, you want to click on the terminal application inside of the Laravel window. So with your terminal open, all we have to do is type in the command to create a new project. But we'll want to make sure we're in the correct directory that we want to be in. So I want to go to my sites directory. That's where I want to create this project. So I'm going to do cd tilde and sites. That will take me to my sites directory. From there, I can create my Laravel project. So I'll do Laravel new, and then the name of the project, in this case, is grocery. And we can see here, starting crafting application, and this is going to take a little while as it downloads and installs all the necessary requirements. All right, so once that's complete, you should have the application is ready, and we can start working on our project. So the next step is to open this project up into Visual Studio Code. All right, so I have my project opened up into Visual Studio Code here, and the next step we'll want to do is we'll want to update the environmental file so that it will point to our database that we created earlier. So let's go ahead and open up the environmental file. Again, that's the .env file, which is at the root of our project. So we'll open this up, and just down a little bit away, starting at line 9, is where our database connection settings are. So we'll just want to make sure we update these settings. We are using a MySQL database. We are using the local IP address. Our port is 3306. The database name here is not Laravel. It is grocery. And the username is root, and the password is root. Okay, so once we have those environmental settings set, we can go ahead and save our environmental file, close that window. Now that we have that set up, we can create our model controller and migration files that we will need to make our application work. And to do this, we will use the artisan command line tool from Laravel. So we're going to do this right from our Visual Studio Code window. We'll open up our terminal. So again, you can go up to Terminal, New Terminal. That will open up the terminal application. I'm just going to do clear here to clear that message. And now we want to write the command to create both the model for our items as well as the controller and migration file. So we're only going to be having one table for this project, which is an items table, which will hold the items that are inside of our grocery list. So because we only have one table, for every table we create a model and a controller and a migration file. And we can do this all in one line. So to do this, we do PHP artisan. Ooh, I have trouble spelling artisan there. So PHP artisan, then we do make model. Then we want the name of our model, which is item. And this will create the model, but we also want to create a controller and a migration file. So we'll do -c m. So that's C for controller and M for migration file. All right, so once we have that, we can click enter, and it's going to create our migration file, and it created our controller. So we have model created, we have created migration, and controller created successfully. So we have all three created. We can take a look at those files. So our model file is going to be inside of application. Right here is our item.php. That is our model. Inside of the HTTP controllers will be our item controller. And then if we scroll down further, we got this database folder. And inside of there will be migrations. And there's just a little bit closed off there. So we have our items folder. Our items migration file. Now you notice these other ones as well. We will be including those into our database because they're provided by Laravel. It's for authentication, which we'll be talking about in the next lecture. All right, so we have our files created. So we have our model created, we have our controller created, and we have our migration created. So now we need to set up our migration file to display the content we want. So the migration file allows us to create a table inside of our database. And the reason why we don't use phpMyAdmin and instead use this migration file is it allows us to have more control and kind of versioning control of our database, which we wouldn't have. So we can tell Laravel to dynamically create the table for us, and then if we don't like the way things are, we can roll it back. It's a pretty neat feature. So let's go ahead and open up the migration file for our items. So again, that is in database, migrations, and then just look for the file. It's going to have this number. This is the date that was created. So it's going to look different for you. But what we want is create items table. That's what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and open that up. Okay, size this down so we can go ahead and close this as well. We don't need that open anymore. So here we go. We have our migration table. And we haven't talked about migrations yet in this class, but so I'm going to go through this slowly. All migration files look relatively the same. It's going to have this class for creating that extends the migration class, And inside of it, it will have generally two methods, an up method and a down method. The up method is for creating the new table and specifically creating the columns inside of the table. The down method is for reversing the effect, basically dropping the table and all of its columns. And then you can recreate it again. So what we want to do here is we want to create our table. So right here is our schema. This is our table that we're creating. Now it's going to create the items table for us. And now we just need to specify which columns to create inside of that table. Now all tables for Laravel should have an ID. This is the primary key for that table. And in relational databases, all tables must have a primary key. Then we have these timestamps. Now these are two columns that Laravel manages for us. It's the created at and updated at columns, and this is basically for tracking of a row. So we'll go ahead and keep these included as well. We're just going to add some new columns for our items. Now, our items are going to have two columns added to them. The first one is a description column, and this is basically what the item is. Now this is a grocery list, so this is mostly grocery items like milk, bread, eggs, that type of thing. The next column we're going to have is a Boolean, which is a checked, whether or not we've checked the item off or we have picked up the item. So we'll have a checked column as well. So let's go ahead and add those. So we're going to add our description. So we'll start with table. And then we'll have our object arrow. Again, this is going to call up a method. Now, our description is of a data type text. So we can put text stored inside of our database. We need to specify what data type it's going to be. So it'll be text. And then we want the name of our column inside of the parentheses. So it's going to be description. We'll add our semicolon, and that's our next column. So that's our description column. Let's add our checked column. Now our checked column, like I mentioned before, will be a Boolean. And it's going to have the name checked. Now we're going to add one more thing here, and that is we're going to have a default to our checked. So by default, all new items will be have a false, or in the case of a database, it's actually stored as 0 and 1. So it's going to have a default of 1. So we're going to do, again, our arrow, default, 0. Okay, so that means it's unchecked by default. And that way we don't have to include checked when we create our new items. So there we go. That's it. This is actually a very simple table. We just have a description, a checked. We'll keep our timestamps, and we need our primary key. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and save this file, and let's open up our terminal again. So I've closed mine, but I'm going to go ahead and open it up again. There we go. And we now need to run the migration. And when we run the migration, it will automatically create all of the tables and columns that are specified inside of our migration table. Or excuse me, our migration files. So let's go ahead and do that. We do this by, again, calling on artisan. So we're going to do PHP artisan, and we'll do migrate. Okay, we'll hit enter, and it's going to read our migration files, create the tables, and we're all set. So it was really fast. Again, we'll have those tables. If we were to go back to phpMyAdmin, you can do that. Actually, let's do that right now. Let's go back to phpMyAdmin. So here we are in phpMyAdmin, and I'm going to refresh the page. We can see inside of our groceries database, we now have multiple tables. Again, this failed job and users and migrations tables were created by Laravel. Okay, so the failed jobs and the users are part of the authentication. The migrations table keeps track of any migrations that we're creating, and the items table is the one we created. So if we click on that, we can see inside the structure, we have the columns we've created. So we have the ID, that's the primary key. Our description is going to hold the description of the item. Checked here is our Boolean. again, whether or not it's a checked item. And then we have the created at and updated at. Now again, these are going to be managed by Laravel. We generally don't need to play around with these. Now, while we're in our PHPMyAdmin, let's go ahead and manually add some items to our table here so that we can view them inside of our project. Later on, we'll actually set it up so we can create these items through the Laravel application, but for now we're just going to add a few so we have something to look at. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm already on the items table. I have that selected, so I'm going to go to the Insert tab inside of PHPMyAdmin. And right here, I can add in the data I want. Now, ID will generally leave alone. The database will automatically create ID for us, so we don't need to add anything there. For description, we're going to add in our description of the item, so that we're just going to put in something simple like milk. We'll leave checked as 0. And for the timestamps here, created at and update at, we're just going to select current time for both. Okay, so it's current time for both. Now automatically add that. We're going to add another one here. So again, we'll leave the ID alone. For description, let's just put in eggs. We'll leave checked at 0. And again, for created at and updated at, we'll put current time. All right, so with those created, we're just going to click this go button right here. And that will automatically insert the items inside of our database. So we can jump back to our Browse tab right here. And inside of our items table, we can see that we have our 2 items. Okay, so that will give us something to actually retrieve from the database when we work on it inside of our Laravel. So let's jump back to VS Code and start adding the structure so that we can view these items inside of our app. Okay, so we're back in VS Code here, and I still have the migration file open. We don't really need to use the migration file anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. And now our next step here is to create the index method inside of our controller that will show all of the items. So let's go ahead and go to our items controller. Now, with Laravel, because there are so many files and so many folders, it's generally a good idea to use the shortcut commands to find files. Inside of VS Code, it is Command P on a Mac and Control P on Windows. So we'll hit Command P, and that'll bring up a prompt here, and we can just start typing what we're looking for. So the file we're looking for is the item controller. And you can see right here, I didn't even finish typing, but the first item at the top is the one I want, so I'm just going to hit enter. And that's going to open this file up. Again, I'll be using that shortcut quite a bit, so I do recommend you try and build up that muscle memory to use that, because once you get into these larger projects, hunting down those files can be time consuming. All right, so let me close my Explorer there. So now we're inside of the item controller, and we want to add the method index to show all of our items. First thing we need to do though is to link up our item model inside of our controller so that we can access that items table. So we do that using the use keyword. So we'll do right below our request right here, we're going to use use, and we'll do app / item. Right, like that. So now we will have this item variable that we can use that will be tied to the items table, because it's actually calling up the items model, which again is tied to our items table inside of our database. All right, so let's go ahead and create our index, our first method, the index method. So we'll start with public function index, right, like that. Now we want to call upon our item model. Now, we talked about this before. In order to retrieve all the items from a database, we can use the all method of a database, or excuse me, of a model inside of our Laravel project. So we're going to do item : all. And we need to set this to a variable so we have access to that data that we're getting back. So we'll just do items equals item : all. Now we just need to return this to a view. So we're going to do return view. And the view we're going to return to is the home view. We haven't created this view yet, but we're going to be doing that soon. And we want to pass some data to that view, and we want to pass the items specifically. So we're going to do items, and then $items. There we go. Okay, so that creates our first model. Now that we're done with this, we can go ahead and save this controller. We shouldn't view our site yet because, again, we haven't set up the rest of it yet. The next thing we want to do is we want to update our route so that it points to this controller. So let's do that next. Again, we're going to use that shortcut, so I'm going to do Command P. And I know that my routes are going to be stored in the web.php file. So I'm going to do web.php. There we go. And I'll open that up. Now we already have a route here, and it's pointing to our welcome page. Okay, we saw this before when we're working with Laravel. We don't need that anymore, but we do want this slash. So this slash will take us to our home view, or specifically our index method inside of our items controller. So we're going to replace this function in this route with item controller at index. All right, so there we go. So that's going to point to our index method inside of our controller. Okay, and we can go ahead and save that. Now again, this still will not work because we have not created the view home. So we're going to do that next. All right, so in order to create the view, the home view that we need to do, we need to create a new file inside of resources views. So let's open up our Explorer here, and let's find the resources folder, and inside of there, the views folder. And right now we can see that here is the welcome.blade.php file that Laravel adds by default to a new Laravel project. So what we want to do is add our home view. So I'm going to go new file, right click and new file, and I'm going to call it home.blade.php. With that file open, I'm just going to create a basic HTML structure. Now generally in larger Laravel project, we would want to create a layout file, but because this project is actually going to only exist in a single view, we're just going to have it all in one. So we're going to create a basic HTML structure using Emmet. So I'm going to do the exclamation point tab. That'll create my basic structure. I'm going to add a title here. We're just going to call it grocery list. Okay. And now I'm going to add some resources that we're going to want to use for this project. So I'm going to jump over to my browser because we're going to grab in Bootstrap and Font Awesome and add them to our project so that we can use it to create our application. Okay, so I'm here in my browser and I'm going to go get Bootstrap. So I can get Bootstrap by going to getbootstrap.com. And from the main page, I'll click the Get Started button. And I'll just scroll down a little bit. And what we want to do is just grab from their CDN. So right here is the CSS. So I'll just copy that line of code. And I'll jump back to my project. And then I'll paste that in. Then I'm going to jump back to my browser again. And we're going to grab the JavaScript files as well. So I'm going to copy all those. I'll come back here and I'm going to paste those right at the end of my body. Okay, so right there. So now this has the CSS for Bootstrap as well as the script. Again, this will make it a little bit easier. I don't have to worry about making styles for this application. I'm just going to use the Bootstrap styles to help speed along the development of this project. So the one more thing I need is Font Awesome because I'm going to want to use some icons, and Bootstrap doesn't come with its own icon. So I'm going to go back to my browser. I'm going to do a search for Font Awesome. Now you can do .com, but they don't actually have a link to the CDN. So generally I just do a search for fontawesome.cdn. And usually the cdnjs.com is a good resource to get the CDN for, or to get the Font Awesome resource. So I'm going to grab that. Now, it usually defaults to the JavaScript version, but what I want is the CSS version. So I'm going to click the CSS tab. And now I'm just going to grab all of them. Generally, if we knew which ones we wanted, we probably don't need the whole slew of Font Awesomes, but I'm just going to grab all of them just so we have it. And I'll jump back to my page, and I'm going to add that below my Bootstrap style sheet. So we'll just, we actually need to create a link here. So I'm going to create a link tag, CSS, and I'll replace style.css with that link there. Okay, so now I have Bootstrap and my Bootstrap and Font Awesome installed onto my page. So let's go ahead and add some additional stuff to our view so we can see it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to create a basic structure using the Bootstrap structure. If you haven't used Bootstrap before, I do recommend taking a look at the Bootstrap documentation. But what I'm going to be adding is just some basic structure around my application using the Bootstrap grid. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a main tag, and we'll give it a class of container. Okay, and I'm going to add another div here of row, and then a div of column. And we're going to add an additional class here on my row. It's going to be justify content center. This will center my content. And for my column, I'm going to do column-8. So in Bootstrap, the Bootstrap grid uses 12 column system. 8 columns would be not quite, it's 3/4 of the width. So this prevents my content from stretching all the way across the screen. And this justify content center will center it. Okay, so now that we have that, I also want to add a title here. So I'm going to add an h1. I'm going to give it a special class here of display4. And we're going to call it grocery. Call it grocery list. Okay, we'll close that up. Okay, so now that we have that, we know that we've already created our controller and we've already created our root. And inside of our controller, we're passing the item data that we're retrieving from the database to this view. So we already have that available for us. So we want to create a list to display that data. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to create an unordered list here. And again, we're going to use a special Bootstrap class here. They have something called list group, which kind of creates a special type of visual list that kind of looks like the list on your phone. It's kind of neat, and I like to use it for this type of a situation. So I'm going to use that list group, and then inside of here is where all my list items will go. And this will be created dynamically because, again, I don't know how many items I'm going to be getting. So I'm going to use the for each loop to loop over all the items that are being passed to my view here. So we'll do at for each. And again, this works just like the for each loop inside of PHP, which we've been using. So we'll do at for each. Then I'm going to do items as item. So that means each item will be stored in the item tag, the item variable. And now I'm going to create the li tag. Whoops, that's not what we want. Oh, okay, guess that's not going to work. So we'll do class. And this requires a special class of list group item. And then we're going to add the description in between this list item. So we do, oops, forgot my curly braces, need my mustache syntax there. Item description. Okay, so that'll output the description of that specific item. We'll close up my list item, and there we go. Okay, so that, whoops, forgot to close up my for each loop. Don't want to do that. So end for each. Okay, so what we have here is we've created a basic HTML structure, using Bootstrap so that we can display the items that we've added to our database. we already created our controller and our root, so let's go ahead and test this out. We're going to go back to our browser and we're going to load this up in the browser to see what we get. All right, so in my browser, I've already, we have our browser open. So the URL we want to go to, because we created a Laravel project called Grocery, Laravel automatically set up a URL for us that's under grocery.test. If you are using Laragon, the same URL will also apply to you as well. So we'll do grocery.test. And we can see here, loaded up, we have our grocery list title that we created, as well as our 2 items that we created in our database. So with this, we are now displaying data from our database. So our next step now is to create, to build up the interface that we can create new items and add them to the database while displaying them on our page. So let's go ahead and do that next. So we're back into VS Code, and in the previous step, we worked building controller, then the root, then the view. We're going to do it in reverse. Now we have our view open, so we're going to add the structure, the HTML structure we need to design or to add the interface for in order to create new items, and then we will update the root as well as the controller. All right, so in order to do this, what we're going to be doing is we're going to add another list item here below our for each. So we're going to have the form to create a new item inside of our list group. So it kind of looks like it will be just below it, and it'll have this kind of nice little interface for us. So we're going to add a new list item here. It will still have a class of list group item. There we go. And inside of this list item, we're going to add a form. Okay. So we're going to add a form here. Oops. And this form will have a method of post. And it will have an action of /item. Okay. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail when we talk about our root. So I'm going to close up my form. All right, so now that we have our form, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add an input, and this input will hold the description of our item. So we're just going to add an input here. It's going to be a text input, like that. It will have a name of description. It doesn't really need an ID. And then we're going to, that's actually all we need. So we just need our text and our description, and we'll go ahead and save this. So now let's go ahead and jump to our web.php, and we will add the root that we need, this /items root, to our web.php. Okay, so here we are in the root. Now we're going to add our root here. This next thing, we're going to create the root that will process the form that we're just created, our create form. And we know that when we create an item, when we request to create an item inside of PHP, as we talked about earlier, we want to do that using a post protocol, or the post HTTP verb. So we'll want to use the post method here for that processing. Right? So we'll do / and then item. So this will be the URI for creating new items. So /item, and we know we can do this because we're using the post, and we're using the post verb here. Now this is going to point to the items controller, and it's going to specifically point to the store method. Again, we use the store method to add new items. Now you might be asking, how come we didn't create a create method here and point to that form? Well, again, as I talked about earlier, we are not going to be doing that in this project because our form is going to exist on our home view. So we don't need to load a special view just to display that form. All right, so we got the store. So let's go ahead and save this, and we'll jump back to our item controller here. And we're going to create our store method to store a new item. So we're going to do public function store, right? And we'll open that up. Okay, so when we're storing new items or updating existing items, Laravel's Eloquent, which is what we're being using to communicate with our database, has specific ways of creating items using object-oriented approaches. And it's actually a pretty slick way of creating and updating items. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new item using the new keyword here. So we're going to create a variable called item, and we'll go new item. Right? And this is a bit of object-oriented programming here. Again, item here is in class, and so we're creating a new instance of that item class, and we're storing it into the item. On the back end, Laravel is recognizing that this means that we want to create a new row or a new item inside of our items table. So we have this new item, but it has no data to it, so we want to add the data we need to. So we're going to add the description. So we'll do item description, and it will equal the data that was passed to from the form. So we can get any data being passed from a form using the request helper method. Okay, request. And we just need the name of the input that we want the data from. So in this case, we want it from description. And this is really the only content we need to pass to our item. So the other ones, the check is set by default to 0, which is what we want to set to for new items. And the create and update are going to be handled by Laravel for us. So we don't need to explicitly set those data. And the ID, the primary ID, is being created by the database itself. So we already have everything we need. Now we just need to save it. And by saving it, this will create the new item for us inside of the database. And that's it. That's all it is. 3 lines of code, and we've created a new item inside of the database. Now we're just going to redirect. Because we are pointing to /item to manage the creating of this item, we want to go back to the home page so that we can see the new item created. So we're going to use the redirect method inside of Laravel, and we're going to tell it to redirect back to the / back to the home page. And this will be handled by the root. So when we go / here, it'll be handled by the root, and our root for the /URI will call the index method, and this index method will then retrieve all of the items, including this new one that was just created, and then display them for us. So it's all this kind of seamless reaction. So let's go ahead and test this out. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file, and we'll go back to our browser to test this out. So I'm going to come back here. Let me refresh my page. Okay, so now we see that we have our grocery site here with the grocery list. We have milk and eggs, and then we have this little text box here with some items. You can see I've been playing around and adding new items already. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to bananas here. I'm going to add some bananas. I'm going to hit enter. And we get an error. Now, for some of you, you might be freaking out a little bit. It's like, why is there an error? Well, this was kind of expected, and I'm going to explain why we got this error and how we can fix it. It's actually really simple to fix. So this error is a page expired. This is a protection that Laravel has set in place to prevent malicious characters from hijacking our form. They'll take our form, put it on their own site, maybe change some things up, and allow them to insert things into our database that we might not want. And that's as part of what it's protecting. It's part of the cross-site request forgery. Okay, so it's preventing this from happening. So how do we prevent getting this error? Well, we need to add a special directive to our form that will add a hidden input that will again serve as a token to basically let Laravel know that, no, this is a valid form. Please submit it. All right, so let's go back to our view. So we need to go back to our home.blade.php view, and we need to add a directive above our input here inside of our form. So right inside of our form, we're going to add the @CSRF. Again, cross-site request forgery. Okay, so we just need to add that, and this will create a hidden input for us that will, again, pass that token along to Laravel and allow us to submit the form. So let's go ahead. We're going to have to go back to our form, and we're going to refresh again. And now let's try this again. We're going to go back to bananas, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay, so we have a little problem here. It's not viewing anything. This is actually a real quick fix. This is my problem, my mistake. We just got to go back to our item controller here. I forgot to add a return in front of my redirect here. So we just need to add a return here inside of our store. And let's go back here. We'll refresh again. Yes, continue. It's going to add a second bananas there. So now we have 2 bananas. We really want some bananas. All right, so now we have it. Let's add one more here. So let's add some bread. There we go. There's the seamless reaction. So you can see that was instantaneous. Even though we went to the /items to process it and then came back, we didn't really see it because it's all handling on the back end. We got one refresh and our item showed up. So now we can create items. We can add items to our view automatically. Really great situation. All right, so now that we have our list of items showing up, we have the ability to add new items. Let's work on editing the items. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to set up our items so that we can check them off. Okay, now this is going to require a little bit of some UI as well. So we're going to work on that. And that's what we're going to be working on next. All right, so now that we are able to create new items to our list, let's go ahead and set up what we need to do to add a little check to check the items off. All right, so let's go back to VS Code, and we will set up the method that will update the items checked status. All right, so we're going to create a new method. So remember when we talked about the 7 RESTful methods, we said that there was the index and the show. We said there was the create and store. And we said there was the edit and update. Okay, so we've already created the store. Again, we don't have the create because our form is on the same page, so we don't need a special view for that. So we just have store to create a new item. So likewise, we're going to create just the update method to update the check status of our item. So we're going to create a new method here. So we'll do public function update. Now, update here is going to retrieve an ID because we don't want to update all of the items. We want to update a specific item. So we're going to update the item with a specific ID. Now, inside of our function, we're going to use Eloquent to find the specific ID we want. So we're going to do item here. It's going to be equals item. And we're going to use the find method. We're going to pass in the ID. So this will, the find method finds a specific item by its primary key, which is usually the ID column. All right, so now that we have the item ID, and now that we have the item by its primary key, we can update its checked status. So just like we did with description, we updated its description when we were creating a new item. We can update its checked column or its checked status the same way. So we're going to do item, and we're going to do checked here. So we're going to update the checked property. And again, we're going to use the request method. And this time we're going to look for the checked value. And just like for when inside of our store method, we will use save to update our item. And likewise, we're going to return back to our home view. There we go. Okay, so that is our update method. Again, we're just updating the checked, and our application will only update checked. We're not going to be setting up so you can change the value of our item, but you certainly could do that, and you would update the update method so that it would handle that as well. But for this application, we're just going to be updating the checked. So let's go ahead and save this, and we're going to go back to our web.php. All right, so now that we're in web.php, let's go ahead and add the root to point to the update method that we just created. Okay, so we talked about those 4 different HTTP verbs that we would be using. Get displays data, post creates data, put is used to update data, and delete is used to destroy or delete data. All right, so we're going to be updating data here because we're going to be changing the check status of an item. So we're going to want to use the put HTTP verb, and therefore the put method. So we're going to do root colon put, and the URI here is going to be item slash and then the ID of the item, and this gets passed as one of those URI parameters that we talked about a few weeks back. Right, so that is our URI, and now this will point to our items controller, and it's going to be at the update method. Okay, so items controller update method. So there we go. We have root put, our URI is slash item slash the item ID, and then it's going to point to item controller at update. All right, so now that we have our web, let's go ahead and jump to our view, and let's update the view so that we can take advantage of what we've added to our controller and our root. So back to our home.blade.php, we're going to add in some additional UI components to our list item inside of our for each loop. So each item is going to have essentially its own form which will handle its check status. So let's go ahead and add that in here. So we're going to jump into between here. I'm just going to add some returns here. We're going to add some extra stuff. So the first thing here is we're going to do, we're going to create a new form. So anytime you need to create data or update data or delete data inside of a Laravel application, you're going to want to create a form. Even if it's something as simple as a little check button like we're doing here, you're still going to want to create a form because things need to be handled either by push or put or one of those other methods which you cannot do with simple input or links. All right, unless you're using JavaScript, which in this case we're not. So here we go. We're going to create a new form, right? And the form action here is going to be item slash and then the item ID. So we're going to do item ID. Okay, there we go. So that's going to pass the ID, and it's going to use the method post. Now, we just talked about inside of our root that we need to use put for the update process, right? Post is for creating elements. Put is for updating element or updating items. Well, there is no put method in an HTML form, so we have to use post, and then we're going to use a special directive to spoof it to be a put method. Okay, so we have our form, and we're going to add our CRF here, so we need that. And now we're going to use that special directive that will allow us to spoof the method. And it looks like this. It's at method, and then we just pass it the method we want. In this case, we want the put method. And Laravel is going to handle all of it on the back end for spoofing it. It's actually going to be passed as a post, but then Laravel is going to check this method, and it's going to say, oh yeah, it is a post, but we really want it to be a put, and it's going to let the root know that it's actually meant to be a put. Okay, so the root is going to pass it on to the correct method for us. All right, so we have those two. I'm going to close up my form here before I forget. And now we need to add a couple more things to make this all work for us. The first thing we're going to add is a hidden input. So I'm going to do hidden here. And this hidden input is going to be the checked. We're going to keep this hidden because this input is going to keep the value of our checkbox. And it's the value we want it to be, not its current value. So we need to write a little bit of some logic here to make this work. It's going to look like this. So we're going to grab the item's current value, current checked value. It's going to be either 1 or 0. And now we're going to use a conditional statement, excuse me, the conditional operator to kind of switch its value. So basically we're saying if the item is checked, if the item is 1, then we want the opposite of that, which is 0. Or if it's 0, we want 1. Okay, so we're always getting the opposite of checked. So if the button is clicked, if the button submits this form or pushes the button, it will reverse the value of our check status for this item. All right, so this is a hidden input. So now we just need the form button. Okay, so we're going to create a button here. We're going to give it the class of button. This is just the standard button class for Bootstrap. And now we're going to add an if statement. So we're going to change the color of our button depending on if it's checked or not, if it's completed or not. So if it's completed, we're going to give it a button color of green. And if it's not completed, it's going to get kind of a light gray. All right, so we're going to use the if statement inside of the Blade syntax, the if directive, to make this happen. So I've added some returns here to my classes because we're going to add our if statements right inside of this class here, because it's going to change the classes it needs to be. So we're going to do @if, and then we're going to do item checked. Okay, so this is going to check the value of the check status of our item. So if it is 1, if it's true, then we want it to be a button success. This will be a green button. Else, basically if it's 0, we want it to be a button light. Okay, we want to end our if here. And we're going to close up our quote here, okay, like that. So again, you're allowed to do this, by the way. You're allowed to add any sort of directive, Blade directive, inside of attributes or inside of HTML, wherever you want. It's going to get all compiled down to HTML and look the way you want in the end. All right, so that closes that up, or closes up our button. Now the next part is we're going to add a little icon here. It's a little checked icon from Font Awesome. I'm actually just going to copy this and paste it in here. But you can copy this. It's not terribly long. You can pause the video and type that up. But this is just an icon from Font Awesome, a little checked icon that we're going to put into our button. And then we'll close up our button. Now, this button is going to submit the form when it's clicked. So when it submits the form, it's going to submit it to this URL. Okay. Our root is going to check that and see that we want to put it on the put method with this ID. It will call our update method inside of the controller. Excuse me. It will call that update method inside the controller, passing that ID around, and it will update the. It will then update the database for us. All right, so let's go ahead and test this out. This is the last step. So we're going to save our view, and let's go back to our browser and test our form out. So here we are in the browser. So let's go ahead and refresh the page so we can see the new style changes we made. Now we're going to add some additional styles to kind of clean this up a little bit. But for now, we're just looking at this. So we can see that these buttons are appearing next to it. And you notice none of them are checked because we haven't really checked anything off. So let's go ahead and check an item off. So I'm going to click on eggs. And it's going to submit the form. And it's going to come back to our page like it did. And you notice that now it is green. So this is an indication that our eggs have been checked off, that we've completed this task. Okay, I can click on it again and it comes back. So we can switch the check status of our eggs. So let's go back to our styles because this is not looking very user friendly. So let's make some additional changes to our styles to make this look a little bit nicer. All right, so back in our home.blade.php, we're going to add a few things to our styles here to make this look a little bit nicer. So we're going to add some classes to our LI. These are some bootstrap classes to make things line up a little bit nicer. So I'm going to add dflex here. This will switch our list item to a flexbox container. And then I'm going to do align items center, and this will center the items vertically so that they all line up. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go below our form and we're going to add some stuff around our item description so that it will change the way it appears depending on whether or not the item is checked. Right, so we're going to add a span class here. And I'm going to add a class of ML3. This is just going to add some margin to the left of our description so that it has some space between our checkbox and the description text. Then next, we're going to add an if statement here, if directive here. And this is just going to check to see if the item is checked. And if it is, we're just going to add this inline style here. We could probably create a class for this, but just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to inline this style. Okay, so this is a text decoration line through. So what this will do is that when our item is checked, the appearance of the description will have a line through it. Okay. All right, so I need an end if here. Can get that. All right, and then we need to close up our span tag. Okay, so let's save that. Let's go back to our browser and take a look. All right, so back in our browser, let's refresh one more time. Okay, so that looks a little bit nicer. Now everything's nicely lined up. And when I check on my checkbox here, we can see that this turned green, but we can also see that there's a line through it. And we might want to add some additional styles, maybe fade it out. But for now, that's what we're going to stick with. So now we have the ability to check items off of our list. So now we want to go forward and we're going to do one more step, and that is to delete items from our list. So that is the last kind of step, natural step you would do with items. So you have view the items, you have create new items, you have updating items, and you have deleting items. All right, so that's the next step, is to delete items. All right, so we're back in Visual Studio Code, and we're going to add the interface for deleting items. So just like when we wanted to add the check status to change the check status and update an item, we added a form to our view. We're going to need to do the same thing for deleting an item. We're going to add a form after our item's description here. So we're going to add another form here. And this one will be for deleting items. So I'm going to do this. We're going to add a class here of MLAuto. So this one is to add, this is again another bootstrap class. It is margin left auto. This will shove our form over to the right side. All right, so we're going to give it an action here. And the action for this is going to be /item/ and then the item ID. So you'll notice that this is the same URI as our update method. So you would think that this would cause a problem, especially if we're going to use post. But again, we're going to use the spoofing method built in or added by Laravel to change what method this is going to be passed for. So even though it's got the same URI, it's going to use a different method. All right, so we're going to add our cross-site directive there. Whoops. There we go. And now we're going to add the method, just like we did for our update, except this one's going to be for delete. Right, so instead of put, it'll be delete. Okay, so for this form, let's close it up so I don't forget to do that. And now we just need to add a button. There's nothing special for this. When we delete an item, all we want to do is delete it. So, and the ID is being passed across the URI, so we don't need to worry about anything else. So let's just get ahead and add our button. So we're just going to add a button here. it's going to have a class of BTN and BTN danger. This will create a red button, so it kind of stands out. And we're going to give it a trash icon here. Again, I'm just going to copy this and I'll paste it in here. There we go, and we'll do button. All right, so we have our form. That's all that our form needs for this. We'll go ahead and save it. Now we're going to jump back to our web.php and update the root to handle our delete. So inside of our web.php, we're going to create a root. And the root's actually going to look exactly like our update one. So I'm just going to copy this, except for two things. All right, so we're going to change put here to be delete. Okay, so we're going to use the delete method. Again, they're both going to share the same URI. But because they're using two different methods, two different HTTP verbs, this is perfectly fine. The root is going to know which one we mean. All right, so instead of pointing to update though here, we're going to point this to destroy. So remember when we talked about the 7 controller methods? When we want to delete an item, we use the destroy method. And that's what we're going to do here, and that's what we're going to create next. So let's go ahead and save this. And we'll go back to item controller.php, and we're going to add that destroy method to our controller. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to do public function destroy, and it's going to have an ID passed to it as well. And just like with our update, we're going to retrieve the item we want to delete. So we're going to do item equals item find. Ooh, having trouble typing. Find. We're going to do ID. Okay, so there we go. This will get the item that we want to delete. And to delete it, we just call the delete method. And this will delete the item from our database. Now, Laravel also has something known as soft deleting, and you can take a look at their documentation or the content pages on the course website to learn a little bit more of how to do soft deleting. But this will do a permanent delete, and it will delete it from the database. All right, so once we have deleted it from the database, we again just want to return back to the home page. So we'll do a redirect here, and we're just going to do slash. All right, so there we go. That is our destroy method. We've already set up our root. We've already set up our view. So let's go back to the browser and take a look at it. All right, so here we are back in the browser. Let's refresh one more time. And now we can see our little delete buttons have appeared here. So we can delete an item. So let's delete this extra bananas item we have in here. So I'm just going to click delete. And we can see that the page refreshed and it's gone. Okay, so I can do this along with checking off things. So I've checked these off. All right, so now I'm done with them. I don't need those anymore. So I can delete them as well. And the items are gone. All right, and that is essentially our grocery list application. So we've been the ability of adding or displaying the items that are inside of our database. We can edit those items by changing their check status, and we can delete the items altogether. And that is our grocery list application. I hope you enjoyed that. Let's go back to the slides, and we will talk about your final project. All right, so your final project for this course is going to be a task manager. It sounds very similar to grocery list, and that was intentional as well, but task managers kind of takes it a step beyond what we just did with grocery list. All right, so this is a GitHub Classroom assignment, so make sure that you do accept the GitHub Classroom by clicking on the link. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be creating a task manager web application. And basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to allow the ability for users to register and sign into the application. So you're going to be adding an authentication portion to this application where users can register, and then they have to sign in order to be able to use the app. Once they're signed in, users will be able to create, view, edit, and delete groups, which are lists, and items. So they'll be able to create multiple lists and have multiple items. And the application should be able to handle which items go with which list. Now, migration files have been provided for you, so you do not have to design the database yourself. Even though this is a fairly simple database, I didn't want to add that extra difficulty to this assignment. So I've provided you with the migration files already. There are instructions on the assignment page on how to basically set up your database and get your migration set up. There's also instructions on kind of how to set up the basic authentication that you'll need for this application. All right, so the final due date for this is Monday, April 13th, 11:59 p.m. This is the last week of classes, assuming that there is no changes to the schedule due to the most recent difficulties that we've been experiencing. But for now, the due date for this is April 13th. All right, so that wraps up this lecture. The next lecture will be on authentication. Again, that is setting up your Laravel application so that it can accept registration from users as well as allowing them to sign in. It is actually remarkably simple. Laravel has made this extremely easy to set up and extremely fast. It should be a pretty quick lecture. But for now, that's all I've got. Thank you for watching.